I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth. Today, we've got a pretty good episode, and it kind of goes back to a question that we've been getting for about the last almost 20 years now. And joined today, Judd Jarzynka from the marketing team. And this podcast was actually Judd's idea. We were kind of spitballing some ideas. And Judd, you've been with the company almost a decade now, and it seems like you've been asked this question a few times.
Well, yeah. Just doing on the video side of things, posting videos to YouTube and on the social media stuff, sometimes there's some confusion between critical defense, critical duty, and I just think we can't hit it enough. There's specific purposes for each of them, and one excels at one thing where another is kind of angled a different direction. So, I think it's just something that we can keep hitting on and
shed some light on. Well, and it's easy when you're in an echo chamber at Hornady we understand the difference and when you would choose one over the other. But not everybody knows our product line like we do. So to talk through a lot of this and to get some peek behind the curtain, if you will, between critical defense and critical duty, special guest, new face, new voice to the podcast. Judd, join me in welcoming John Hasselmann. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Big fan. Thanks for having me.
Big fan. Right. Well, before we dive into critical defense, critical duty, let's hear a little bit about John. Obviously, we want to know what you're doing right now and your level of expertise with critical defense and critical duty. But what got you into Hornady, and where did you progress through the company to get where you're at today?
Yeah. So 6 going on 7 years ago, applied to the company. I heard it was the best job in town. So put in my app, got hired, started making these projectiles right here. Duty and defense bullets. Yes, sir. Worked my way up. Right now I'm doing law enforcement military contracts. So dealing with this stuff every day. Every
single day. So that's pretty cool that your first, hey, you're working at Hornady, this is how you make a bullet. Not only is it just a bullet, it happens to be a pretty darn important couple bullets.
It's a big deal.
That is a unique perspective to see that. And then you glossed over several years in the middle there when you worked as a technical representative.
Yep, I did do that for quite a while.
Yeah. So there's probably a few people listening to this podcast right now that, hey, I know that voice.
Yep, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was John Hasselmann up there. So in that, I bring that up because as a technical representative, you answer this question, I would almost daily, certainly weekly.
Yeah.
A few times a week for the last several years. And again, being in that echo chamber we're in, it's easy to just blindly regurgitate it because we know about it. But I think, like Judd mentioned when we were discussing podcast topics, every trade show we go to, every time someone sees us, and not every time, but a bunch of times someone recognizes you from something, you'll get that. What are you going to carry? You get it in the podcast comments, emails, YouTube comments. So let's attack this now. Also, before we get there, I just mentioned podcast comments and emails and stuff. Keep the interaction coming out there. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, we do want to hear about them. And who knows, they might end up as a whole podcast episode in and of themselves. So keep the emails coming, podcast@hornady.com. Drop comments right here on the YouTubes, and we'll get back to you as best we can. So where should we start? Should we start critical defense or critical duty?
I don't know. In my opinion, I think defense would cover a broad spectrum of consumers out there.
I think so, and it's kind of right in the name there. Let's talk through what makes critical defense, and what are some of the specific use cases where critical defense would be your best ammunition choice.
So for the defense box, I would go with, if you're carrying a backup, if you're a law enforcement officer, off duty, or the civilian in a defensive aspect. Smaller frame pistols. That's going to be a big deal.
Well, hit on you talked about barrier blind, where critical defense isn't really designed for that purpose, but it's designed for that purpose for a purpose.
Right.
You know, hit on that where you were talking about, you know, the risk of over penetration or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, just like Seth said, in the name, it's defensive ammunition.
Right.
So if your threat is behind a windshield or a wall, if that's the case, you probably got some time to get out of there.
Yeah, which is the preferred option.
Yeah, because this is absolute last case scenario right here.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you don't ever have to use it, but.
And I can't remember if when we had Scott Javins on the last podcast or a couple podcasts ago now, did he hit on, I know I heard him say around the office and in his class that I've done, you know, most of those engagements are, you know, this close.
Right.
So, you know,
3 to 7 yards.
3 to 7
Yeah.
yards.
Yeah.
So that's, if any further away than that, it might be a hard time claiming defense. And,
Yep.
you know, in defense of your life, you know, you're probably not going to have to shoot through a wall or a car door. And we mentioned those barriers specifically, and we'll talk about them more in regard to critical duty, because the FBI has a specific protocol laid out on how they gauge bullet performance for what they need, the FBI protocol for penetration. And you have to shoot through plywood, wallboard, sheet metal, a car window, heavy clothing. I mean, there's just a lot of barriers you have to defeat. And then you have to penetrate. What they want is 12 to 18. We really shoot for 14 to 16 inches of penetration after going into that barrier. So with a defense round, we don't want to shoot through the barrier. We want to go through maybe heavy clothing, which is what this was designed for with that polymer tip that we use, and land somewhere between 8 and maybe 12 inches of penetration. And that what some people would consider reduced penetration is actually a selling feature with this bullet.
Absolutely.
that made me think of one thing as you were talking here that we kind of glanced over as well. Seth, to give even more credibility, when you were working as a ballistician before you moved to the marketing team, how many rounds of critical duty, critical defense did you test into ballistic gel?
Countless.
Yeah.
And John's done a bunch as well. But yeah, when I started as a ballistician, we had just won our first FBI contract for critical duty ammunition in 9mm. And we test those bullets like you wouldn't believe through the production life of the bullet. And then we load it into ammo. And we also do lot testing and acceptance on the ammo. So critical duty gets shot a lot for penetration and performance. And then within that, we always shoot critical defense as well. At New Bullet Design, we shoot a bunch of those. So between the two of us, we've shot thousands of bullets into ballistic gelatin and seen the results. And I can speak to critical defense. When we would test these bullets, you put up the heavy clothing barrier attached to the gel block, which is like a cotton t-shirt material, like a nylon dress shirt material, Polar Tech 200 fleece, and then a layer of denim. So there's 4 layers there.
And that goes in front of
It goes right against the gel. And where a traditional hollow point, like a RXTP, for example, but other traditional shaped hollow points on the market in defensive ammo, as it tries to penetrate through that clothing barrier, the clothing will clog that hollow cavity, and that bullet will fail to expand. And you end up with a non-expanding bullet that is going to penetrate very deep because it's not transferring energy.
Yep. Usually it comes right out the back of the block.
The way the critical defense works is it's got an elastomer tip in that cavity, and so it's already full. And for lack of a better term, it's really squishy. How does that work out?
It works out great. So basically that tip is going to get, would you call it a hydraulic, drawing a blank here.
Yeah, well, it's compressed,
Yeah.
and then you get that hydraulic effect.
And it just pedals that jacket back, and it's just beautiful. Beautiful
Every
expansion.
single time.
Yep.
It's beautiful. That's great, because those hollow points, I've shot a bunch of those. I know you have too, because we shoot competitor products. And when you shoot hollow points into gel through the barrier, sometimes, man, they look pretty good.
Yeah.
And sometimes they look downright awful. The critical defense bullet with that polymer tip, it upsets the same every single time. you shoot it.
Consistency.
Yep, it's beautiful. And that penetration depth is, not an accident. A lot of times, we want that depth of penetration, so we'll adjust muzzle velocity and bullet weight so that we end up with that level of penetration through the heavy clothing barrier.
Yep.
So none of that's an accident. And There's more to it, though. We'll talk a little bit about bullet construction once we talk about critical duty, but there's more to critical defense than just the bullet. So the other thing we do is propellant.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the propellant that we use.
So we have a propellant in there that reduces muzzle flash. So low light conditions, that's going to be in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
You won't be blinded after the first shot, so you can stay tracking on the target.
Yep.
Reduced felt recoil, rather. What else do we have here?
Yeah, that low flash is huge. You know, for those of you who are listening and haven't fired a pistol outside in the dark, it lights stuff up.
Yeah.
You know, it's shocking how some rounds can be produce so much muzzle flash.
Yeah.
And not desirable. And then you get the muzzle flip. You got all that ejecta coming out, and like John mentioned, we pick a propellant that is fast burning for caliber, so we use less propellant, so we have less chance of muzzle flash, plus the flash deterrents that are in there. That all makes it perfect for low flash conditions, low recoil, but it also makes it perfect for, like you mentioned at the beginning, smaller framed handguns, because you're using less propellant, less felt recoil. Those small guns where maybe your pinky's not even holding on the magazine, you're not going to beat the guns up, you're not going to beat your hand up, and you can get subsequent shots on target quickly.
Yep, absolutely.
Is that what we do our gelatin testing with for critical defense?
For critical defense, I typically use a 9mm, for example, something shorter than a 4-inch barrel. So depending on the gun.
43X.
Yeah, Glock 43X would be a big one. Glock 43. I have tested it through Glock 19. I've shot it from a Glock 17. And when you increase the barrel length, what you actually do is decrease your penetration in the gelatin. That's a good point, Judd. Thanks for bringing that up. But that seems counterintuitive that you would give it more nasty speed and it actually limits the penetration.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that polymer tip, that bullet just mushrooms out, transfers more energy.
Velocity makes bullets work.
They do.
So
it's just how it is.
Yep.
So we made it to really be optimum in those shorter barrel lengths. You can run it through a full-size gun. They will perfectly cycle your Glock 17, for example. But, you know, Springfield Hellcat, Glock 43, you're still going to get that desirable level of penetration where it's more than adequate in a defense scenario.
So we talked about, you know, the engagement distance, the average. So when you're testing these, you know, what distance are you doing these gelatin shots at?
A lot of those are 7 yards.
7 yards?
Yep.
Is that what it is?
So critical defense, awesome option for, I would say, 90+% of the use case. You know, where your concealed carry is a big one. Home defense is great. You know, like you mentioned, where you're got the barriers with critical duty. With critical defense, you're in a home with your wife and your children.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go through any barriers.
Yeah.
Or should you be in a public setting, grocery store, movie theater,
whatever.
Yeah.
Very important aspects to consider. And that critical defense bullet, we'll talk more about bullet construction here in a bit, but I'll say this now just to get the terms out there. The critical defense bullet, no interlock ring, and it has a cannular groove on the outside. And that cannular groove helps us crimp the bullet in place, but it also helps hold that bullet together a little bit. But there's no other mechanical means or bonding methods to hold the bullet together. So it does expand quickly, uniformly, just the way we want it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the FTX bullet.
Yep.
Correct.
Yeah, the critical defense. Yeah, the FTX bullet, which we have talked about this now for the last 10 minutes and haven't even mentioned Dave Emery.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Dave Emery, senior ballistic scientist at Hornady, started here in 1994 and then just absolutely crushed it. I mean, he was the Barry Bonds of the ballistics. He just hit homer after homer after homer. It was crazy. And critical defense and critical duty were two of his, you know, hallmarks, I guess you'd call it. I mean, the Creedmoor, 6.5 Creedmoor is probably number one, but regarding pistol ammunition, these were so influential in the industry that, we owe him a debt of gratitude for coming up with this and doing all the R&D and making it work, and the hundreds of tons of ballistic gelatin
Well, how did that start? Didn't he? The story I've always heard is he would go to the hardware store and get started with silicone or something, and was
it was basically to just proof of concept.
Oh.
Is this going to work? And then he got into more of the chemistry. But the proof of concept was, well, let's get some RTV sealant and some silicone and just find different materials to try to plug that up to see if we could get something consistent. And once he found some consistency, and then obviously worked with some chemistry guys and got a proprietary material that works really, really well. But yeah, the proof of concept, that's just ingenuity right there.
Yeah.
Getting it done. So let's change gears a little bit. We'll talk about the critical duty specifically, and then maybe we'll circle back around and talk about all, how they interact with each other and whatever. So starting now with critical duty, which has been, man, when we won that first FBI contract, I don't think there was a ammunition that had been tested by the FBI that scored higher than critical duty. It is simply amazing. So we'll probably talk about 9mm quite a bit, but we'll talk about all of the caliber options we have for each. But that critical duty, John, walk us through what makes critical duty critical duty.
So basically, there's a few fundamentals here. We do have a mechanical interlock in this projectile. We use a lead alloy.
Okay.
I don't want to get into too many details.
Yeah.
And then we also have some shear points added into this projectile for barrier purposes. So we still get that penetration beyond barrier.
Right. Which is huge.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we got the flex lock bullet that has the mechanical means of holding itself together, and that's how we get that added penetration.
Which are heavier bullet weights, correct?
Typically, yeah.
Per caliber?
Yeah.
What does that help promote, the penetration?
Anymore with this design, caliber selection is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part, 357 SIG, 45 auto, 40 Smith & Wesson 9mm, if you shoot all of those in gel, they're all going to live at 14, 15 inches in
through
gel.
all the barriers.
Yeah.
Really?
So, yeah, they're that consistent. It all is because of that bullet. And
Yep.
generally, they are heavier per caliber,
Mhm.
so you get a little more mass, and that allows us to really control some of the barrier performance through jacket thickness and construction. You can manipulate things and hold things together here and make them come apart up here, so that it penetrates straight and consistently. So they generally are heavier for caliber.
Mhm.
Now, the FBI still has critical duty on contract. Talk about that ammo specifically. Grain weight, is it a plus P? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so right now on contract is 135 plus P, 9mm, of course.
Mhm.
They were at 40 Smith & Wesson, and then after all this stuff coming out, they don't see a need to go larger caliber. They just don't have to. And 9mm is so stinking common.
Mm-hmm.
Why look at anything else?
Yeah, you pick up a few extra rounds in the magazine over 40 Smith & Wesson.
Absolutely. Yep.
And you got a bullet that is just flat out designed to perform. So we talked about a lot of those barriers already, and I mentioned most of them, but and this is public information. You can Google FBI protocol for penetration. And I know there's videos out there, people shooting this, but it's not easy to have a bullet shot into bare ballistics gelatin that goes 14 to 15, maybe 16 inches. That's where we design our bullets to live. The FBI will accept 12 to 18, although it's scored differently.
Mhm.
So, but bare gelatin, and then you shoot through heavy clothing, then you shoot through wallboard, then you shoot through plywood, then you shoot through sheet metal, and then you shoot through a car window that is a compound angle of 45 and 15 degrees. And every single time you shoot it, they land 14 to 15 inches, maybe 16 inches of penetration through all of those barriers.
Yep.
I don't think people quite understand the dynamics at play between bare gelatin and 2 sheets of sheet metal to simulate a car door.
Mhm.
To get that bullet to do the same thing every time is quite literally a marvel. I mean, it is a feat of engineering.
Yeah, the thing that always kind of gets me is the glass. From, again, being on the video side and photo side, we've done high speed and taken photos of ballistics gel. The auto glass is the one that seems to be super tough on bullets.
It is. Well, and you shot a bunch of competitor bullets and some traditional hollow points. What do you typically see through glass?
Results may vary.
Your mileage may vary.
Yeah. Depending on the construction, you could see jacket core separation.
Yeah.
The tip's going to collapse. So it's just going to pencil on through that block of gel. Right now, from what I've seen, nobody comes close to what we offer today.
Yeah, you heard it here. And obviously, we're proprietors of our product, and we think they're all awesome. But the reality is, having shot every law enforcement type of bullet on the market, nobody can hang with our stuff. It's that bullet technology. Again, shout out to Dave Emery, is simply phenomenal.
Yep.
And a lot of the same design methodology from the critical defense is in the critical duty with that red elastomer tip. One important note, when you look at critical duty, if you look at the red tip, critical duty bullets will have an H stamped into the polymer tip. A critical defense bullet does not have an H stamped into that tip. So if you have some ammo mixed up and you made a whoopsie, you can tell it apart that way. So again, the critical duty, we seal that ammunition as well. So you're going to get some moisture protrusion protection.
Case mouth and primer.
Case mouth and primer.
Do the same thing on our end as far as the testing goes. As we talked about testing and shooting gel here through this whole podcast, my mind just keeps going to the bucket of expanded bullets. And I don't know, in my 10 years that I've been here, I don't know how many buckets of expanded bullets.
5-gallon bucket.
Yeah,
full of
how many
bullets.
have we gone? And it's so cool looking in that bucket, and it's expanded bullets, variety of different calibers, but they all look identical.
Yep.
So how often, like on critical duty specifically, how often is that tested? It seems pretty often because
well, it is, yeah. At a minimum, it would be twice every 100,000.
Twice.
But it almost never happens that way. Normally, you end up shooting it anywhere from 3 to 6 times per 100,000, simply because we keep such a close eye on this. If they have to make a tooling adjustment, we're going back and shooting it.
Yep.
And if the core seat, they have to move that around, okay, we're going to shoot it again. If they have to get a new punch or die, we're shooting the whole protocol again. So we really keep a close eye on this. And
you have to.
You have to. You owe it to the people who depend on it.
Yep.
And I'll say this, John, I know you've gotten to do this as well. When you speak to people in regard to critical duty, I've spoken with several, I know you have too, of uniformed guys that went home at night because they carried critical duty. It's almost chilling, gives you goosebumps almost, that something so serious is something that we make and that they carry and that they depend on, and they had to depend on.
Oh yeah. When you talk to those guys and they tell you about the performance aspects, it makes it real.
It is. Absolutely. I just got goosebumps when I think about it, because we know some guys in some scenarios that critical duty was the difference between going home and not. And that's cool. And that goes from you as the contract guy and Scott, who's our product manager, and anybody who's ever worked on it, all the way back to the guys in the factory right now that are making the lead alloy, to the guys out there making the bullet, loading the ammo. Like, we all take it serious.
Yep.
It's very rewarding, to say the least.
Concealed carry, personal protection, or home defense. Only the best will do. Critical defense ammunition, developed to provide the best performance for personal protection, no matter what platform you choose. Delivering consistent, reliable performance. Every single time. When lives are on the line, only the best will do. Hornady Critical Defense Ammunition.
So talking about all this testing, we've talked about it here the whole time. The testing that is used, it's not our testing per se. This is FBI protocol testing. We get their protocol and then test to their specs. So the same can be said for the gelatin. I think we should talk about, on the video side, YouTube and wherever, there's all kinds of different gelatin tests out there and clear gelatin and whatnot. And truth may be that it's just not the same. There's specifics to this gelatin.
Yeah, nobody knows more about the specifics than John, but there is a difference between actual ordnance gelatin and synthetic gel, and that's a good point to bring up, Judd. Yeah, John, what do you see there, and why is it so important to use actual ordnance gelatin that's been calibrated?
So I believe, how does the story go? The FBI did a large study, right? So they wanted something that matches
tissue.
as close as possible. Synthetic was not it at all. Inconsistent, doesn't calibrate. It doesn't show the proper penetration expanding capabilities that it is really available with the ammunition. So what they came up with was 10% ordnance gel, and that's what we use. And we mix up a lot of it every day, and we go through gel like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we use. We do what the FBI does.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep. And that's what they've deemed to be the most close replication you can get to actual live tissue.
Yep.
I've seen some of the synthetic stuff works really well for kind of like a general, okay, you can hit it with the bullet expands and you can capture it. And then one of the benefits of synthetic is it doesn't deteriorate. However, it does not properly represent what a bullet's going to do, one, every time, and two, on the outer edges of its performance window, which is a lot of times where we want to test. If you're shooting a bullet right in the meat of its velocity window, well, yeah, it's going to look pretty good. But when you're testing it after a barrier or at really high velocity or really low velocity, you're not going to get the same type of upset as you would with actual ordnance gelatin.
And what is the ordnance gelatin? I mean,
It's not
on my
pretty.
end, I've seen you guys make it, and there is an art form to mixing
yeah.
up a gel block. But I mean, it just looks like sugar and water. It just looks like a
Doesn't smell like it.
No,
No,
I know,
no.
but that's really what it looks like. But
John, yeah, walk us through what is ballistics gelatin.
So it's some water,
Mhm.
and then this powder. And I've been
The
told
sugar.
It's not that sweet. From what I understand, this is what I was told. Everything that does not go into a hot dog goes into this media,
Yeah.
and we mix it
Yeah,
up.
Pig stuff.
Yep.
Dehydrated,
Mm-hmm.
pulverized into powder, and then I'm guessing filtered to have a certain size and consistency.
Mhm.
And then, like you said, you add the water,
Yep. Throw it in the cooler.
reconstitute it,
Yep. You got to hydrate.
the tissue, because
Yep.
it at one point was tissue.
Mm-hmm.
and then so you mix that up, throw it in a cooler a day, couple days.
Depends on the
because
block.
there is a calibration standard
Yes,
for
sir.
the block. Then right before you even test it, you have to calibrate. Yeah.
And that's an important piece to it, right? So anybody could take, this powder, add some hot water and mix it up, whatever. And yeah, okay, you make a gel block, but if it's too soft or if it's too hard, it doesn't replicate the tissue you're trying to replicate. So yeah, we painstakingly have to go through, find the exact recipe that gets that perfect calibration.
Yep. And then when you pull it out of the fridge, you have a small window to use that gel.
It starts to break down
Yep.
and get real slimy
Yep.
and smelly.
Yeah. Well, like you said, we go through a lot of it in a hurry. So yeah, most times that's probably not an issue.
I don't think in the years that I played with gelatin did I ever have some darn it, didn't shoot this gel. I was always like, man, I only made 6 block. I should have made 8.
Can I get another shot in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we talked about Dave Emery to you, and I got to tell this story because you guys will probably get a kick out of it too. And I don't know if it's much of a story, but I always got a kick out of Dave just in his tendencies. And when we talked about making a block of gel is an art form, nobody took that more serious than Dave Emery. Watching him make gel, he'd pour the water in, put the powder in, a little bit of this, a little tap here, a little whatever, and then he would spin it up to mix it and then pull the mixer out, and the bubbles would have to, go down just to a point, and then he'd get back in and mix it again, and then the speed of the drill he was using to mix had to be a certain speed. That guy took it so serious.
Well, if you don't, you end up with gel that is really lumpy. Isn't the powder isn't distributed equally through the water, and then it gets really cloudy. You can't see through it.
Yep.
I just always got a kick out of seeing, Dave's just attention
Process.
to detail, and and he kind of spread that out to everybody. But
it's true though.
it is wild what it takes to make a block of gelatin.
There's
it
a
seems
form.
easy.
Form, recipe, and do not deviate.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep, that's good points to bring up. So we talked about critical defense, critical duty. Again, in summary, critical defense for defensive purposes will run your full-size gun, but really ideal for those compact and subcompact pistols for carrying on your person in your vehicle at home. 90% use case, designed for those 5 to 7 yard engagements. Critical duty, perfectly at home in a full-size gun, typically heavier for caliber bullets. Both of them low flash propellant. Just a really good option from whatever side you're looking at. What we didn't talk about, though, related to critical duty, in some areas, depending on the rules for handgun hunting, that critical duty ammo could be a force to be reckoned with for hunting medium-sized game animals. You look at 357 Magnum, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're antelope, white-tailed deer, something like that, it's designed for that penetration that we've come to expect from it, and that does correlate to some hunting potential.
Yep.
So,
Mm-hmm.
When you look at 357 mag, like I mentioned, 10 millimeter, 175 grain bullet, going to get great penetration. I know several people will run that in the Glock 20 in bear country. It's a good bullet for that, so not to be overlooked.
I think Monty on the marketing team here, didn't he take some critical duty? I can't remember the caliber off the top of my head, but he was hunting hogs with it in Oklahoma or Texas and loved it.
Yeah, I know one of our ballisticians, Jacob, has taken a deer. Again, I'm not sure what caliber, but I know it was critical duty. Good option for that kind of stuff.
I don't know why it wouldn't work.
Yeah, exactly. So going to critical defense here, we have a box here on the table, Critical Defense Light. Now, it's got all the features in critical defense and then some. And the "and then some" is light for a reason, right? So you get into these subcompact pistols, they get pretty snappy. I don't care what you shoot.
They can hurt a little bit.
Yeah, you take a 380 with like a 2-inch barrel.
Yep.
It barks. So we have our Critical Defense Light available in some of the most popular calibers out there, where if you're a small hands kind of person, get hard to get good purchase on a gun, lower the recoil, helps it a little bit. You've got those uber small firearms, maybe you're recoil sensitive. Maybe it helps you get faster follow-up shots. A female shooter is another great reason to choose this stuff. 380, 9mm, 38 special. You can just cut some of the recoil down and still get the exact same kind of penetration you're going to get from the original Critical Defense. Bullet weight's a little lighter. It's great for female shooters, especially in those smaller firearms. You get the 2-inch barrels or the super snub-nosed revolvers. Cutting some of that down just makes it a more enjoyable experience. You can get out and practice with it and not be afraid of it.
The Hornady Security Fireproof Keypad Safe. With a heavy-duty 16-gauge steel body, extra thick 8-gauge steel door, and 4 1-inch diameter locking lugs, the fireproof safe achieves a fire rating of 30 minutes for up to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Both the interior and adjustable shelf are covered in a protective carpet that offers flexible storage configurations while safeguarding valuables from damage. The Fireproof Keypad Safe from Hornady Security.
Awesome, guys. Is there anything else in regard to critical defense or critical duty that you don't think we have touched on?
We could maybe hit on the cases, the nickel plating cases.
Yeah, why would we opt for a nickel-plated case?
The reason we opt for nickel-plated cases is low light visibility, corrosion resistance, easily distinguish it from any other ammunition out there that you could have in your ammo box. What else you got?
They're just plain slippery.
Yeah.
They chamber nice and smooth.
Yep.
It's a very, it almost feels lubrous. Obviously, it's not wet or anything, but it's a very slippery, so it should chamber, help with feeding and extraction, more importantly.
Feed and function.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about, it's kind of a visual aid in low light conditions. That's just checking to make sure, okay, this mag's loaded, or, yep I've got a round in. And, but we talked about it with Scott in the other podcast about, when stuff hits the fan, things just move different. So, having that little helpful indicator, okay, there's a shine.
Yeah, you kind of lose some of those finer motor skills. And so having something that's like, if you have, let's say, a weapons malfunction and you're slamming around magazines, you can clearly distinguish that. And again, in low light, it's going to reflect a little more light, so it's a little easier to find. And they're corrosion resistant as well. All right, guys, thanks for sitting down with me. John, appreciate your expertise on the subject. Judd, always happy to have you on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Everyone out there, hopefully you enjoyed this episode and found it educational. We've got some of the best ammunition on the market, and the Critical Defense, awesome for that personal defense, home defense type scenario, your compact and subcompact firearms, and then that Critical Duty, the barrier blind performance that military and law enforcement people depend on. Pick which one's right for you. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and we'll catch you on the next one.